Wow. Where are you? Where? In what room? In what? It looks.
That's a studio you gave it. You talked with the students of Paris 8, and then where we had the performance of Miriam, Studio Keller.
Oh, I've been
Same
there.
place, yeah.
I've been in this room. Yeah. Yes, not completely well. I'll move it a little closer and see. It's as loud as possible. Okay, let's go on.
What's the weather like in Vermont?
It's this morning. It's the sun has just come up. It's very, very cold. 11 degrees Fahrenheit. I don't know what that is in centigrade. Do you know, Asaf?
It's very cold in centigrade.
Very cold.
-10, I don't know.
-10 maybe. No, more than that.
Yeah?
More than that. I should think more than that.
I have no clue.
Yeah.
It's very cold.
Very cold. And it snowed a little bit last night, so there's just a little bit of snow over everything. It's been warm the last couple of days. So it's been, very pleasant. It's normal to be cold. Last winter, it went to -30, which I think is more or less similar in Fahrenheit. In December. So really freezing. It was really horrible.
I have a question. Mathieu here, who is giving the workshop in Studio Keller, is doing a mix between contact improv and Alexander technique. And I was wondering what was your take on that
Mix?
in between. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, contact has as much information as I had in 1972. Later on, I studied Alexander and had, I don't know, only a couple of weeks of it, but it transformed my body, especially the relationship of my head to the rest of my body, which I think is a very difficult thing to do by yourself. Should I stop for translation? No. Raise your hand if you don't understand. So I think that everything that you study, everything that you can study, is good. I don't see any problem with mixing, things that were invented at different times and by different people, because it isn't so much a matter of finding the purity of the technique. Sometimes this approach is taken by a teacher. They want you only to study a very pure version of a technique, and maybe there are some good reasons for this sometimes. But I think for contact, you're looking mostly for how to, I think that studying movement means growing more material in the brain as well as the body. And so just the experience of practicing and just the experience of thinking about your situation, your posture, your strength, your weakness, the pleasure, the pain, whatever it is that you notice about your body, is important information. But it takes time to let the brain. You have to grow, literally grow, ways to keep the focus and to understand what to do. Literally, the brain has to change, I think. Asaf, what do you think?
No, I think, yes. I agree.
He agrees. He agrees. So anyway, I think if Alexander brings you some new awareness, some revelation about your situation, or if in the practice of it and maybe some aspects of contact you come to a new way to think about yourself, that's what you're looking for. Is just these, it isn't that you're going to find the change, it's like you're going to appreciate a series of changes and a series of new ways to examine your situation. The body is not completely available to us at all times, you know. We start off with very little information, at least I did. Started off with very little information and a certain sort of fixation maybe of myself as me, unchanging, and you know, I couldn't feel even how I was growing. I think I'm talking from sort of teenage years onwards. I just couldn't feel the change. Obviously I was changing. Obviously I was growing a lot, but I wasn't aware, and it wasn't until I started studying my body that I became aware both of how fast it can change, how slow it takes to grow, how slowly things grow, you know, physically, muscularly, stretchability, and began to understand that that certain sensations were actually quite important, and they were simple things. I mean, too simple really to hold up and say, you know, think this or do this. They were just new understandings to me, and they became the basis for understanding that there were more to come. That there are always more to come. There are always new ways to examine. So that
those sensations were, you know, the basis you started with. I think I would guess that in CI the basic sensations are touch or tactile sensation and weight sensations. Was that what you started with?
Certainly, I started with those. I also started with standing still and examining standing still. So I wanted to look at the smallest muscular and skeletal movement that I could find, that I could see. I mean, there are certain things that are available to us, like breath, like the small dance that I'm talking about in standing, like heartbeat, sometimes blood flow. You can feel blood flowing someplace in the body. I remember with Aikido, which you are pointing these two fingers, but pointing all the fingers, you know, in the Aikido. Do you know Aikido? Have you seen it at least? So they have this stance, and it's a defensive stance, you know, and it's also one which has a factor called ki. And ki is never, or at least in my studies, was never defined. So we were supposed to operate with ki, and they never told us what it was, except they said that it wasn't tense. They could see it when it was happening. The teacher could see it. He could watch it develop in a person's mind and body. Anyway, so you're supposed to do that. While doing that, while in that position, I could feel my fingertips start to tingle with circulation. So just the idea of flowing out the finger flowing out the fingers, and continuing, like pointing into the distance with all my fingers at once, made blood flow to my fingertips. I could feel it. I could feel the pulse. I could feel the sensation of readiness to touch, readiness to reach, ready, everything that a reaching action should have. That is, when you reach, in order to enable the action, the circulation should increase in the hands so that you can grasp, or just to keep your hands ready for the work that you're doing or the defense that you're making or whatever. So that leads us to the idea that thought, what you think you're doing, is very important to basic functions in the body. So I'm saying that thinking about this idea that I didn't know what it was, I knew what the posture was, I knew what the energy was supposed to be. It was supposed to be very gentle reaching. Just pursuing that thought, even if I didn't know exactly what it was, what this energy was, pursuing that thought caused physiological changes eventually. I'm talking within a year or two, so not very long really. Maybe it had happened earlier and I hadn't noticed it. Maybe it was only when I really had it that I noticed this new this idea. So what you think matters. And if you are ignorant of your body, which we all are to some degree, so let's just take that as normal, what? My body? Even that thought is going to impose some control over you. And so Alexander has information, I experienced it anyway with my teacher, that changed my thought. And that was very useful. Tai Chi also did that. Aikido also did that. Dance classes did that. And I'm sitting here now, after all these years, realizing how they all kind of came together to make it possible for me to explore my body in the way I did. Everything from technical dance classes to what was called releasing, which was mostly images given you while you lay down, to the exploration of contact, and the moment when I realized that I had some idea, some intuition about this form, but I didn't know what the form was yet. I had not found the form, but I knew there was something there. To Tai Chi, where in practice one day I suddenly felt this extreme difference between the front and the back of my body. To investigating further and deciding that how I wanted to arrange my posture was by releasing my organs downwards into the pelvis. So I wanted to be relaxed. I didn't want to be up, and sort of holding everything up, but really I just wanted to let the organs fall into the pelvis, so they didn't fall forward and make a belly, but they fell downwards into the pelvis so that the weight of the pelvis was consolidated. Consolidated, anybody need a translation?
It's consolidated. It's French, it's the same.
It's French as well, okay. Very useful. So the consolidation of that weight, so there we have an idea. Here's a good example of an idea that changed my dancing. Was in Aikido, they stress that the center of mass is in the pelvis. So I knew that. I had heard this before, but I hadn't had to do it in real time and with a teacher watching me and him telling me whether or not my center of mass was in fact operating from there or whether I was operating from a different center. You can operate from above, you can take it into the limbs, you can operate, without actually affecting the weight or producing any support from the center in the pelvis. In other words, many ways to go wrong and not operate with the basic fact of this pelvic mass center. So eventually I came to accept this and to be able to hold that thought as I was working. It changed everything about my dancing, which up to the point of Aikido had been the Western extension movement method, you know, where you're always extending the limbs as far as possible and using very long leverage all the time, to a much more relaxed way of using my arms. Even if they were in extension, I was using ki instead of tension or tension to operate them, and operating from the center of the body. So that means an image of energy or some kind of flow coming from the center of mass up and out the head and out the arms. And this simple idea transformed my use of weight. So I was no longer extending away from the center, but especially the legs became more relaxed. I was letting the weight down, and my pelvis, the use of my pelvis became more practical. I wasn't operating against that principle. I was operating now with it. So what you think matters. That's all I'm trying to say, you know. So if you, first of all, I suppose you have to think about how you have come to think of your body in the way you do. Maybe dissect a little bit the nature of your thoughts, and then start looking around for other thoughts and say, well, you know, like, how did the Balinese get so, and the Javanese get so involved in just the tiny movements of shoulders and head? What is that? Not only what is this art form and how does it operate as an art form, but I think in every form, basically, there's some information from the artist to the culture about some important aspect of the body. And I think that Balinese movement and the subtlety of it and it tells you something about the spine. And one of the things that I know, I went to Bali once, and one of the things I saw were women carrying huge weights on their heads. And how they were able to do this. Indeed, this is not uncommon all over the world, you know, the carrying of weight on the head. And to do that, you have to extend upward to not be crushed by the weight. You actually have to develop a very strong neck and torso projecting upwards. And this seems to me very much like the idea of the center being in the pelvis and projecting from there, letting the energy rise from there, as opposed to thinking of your center, for instance, as we often do in the West, in the heart, or an emotional center in the diaphragm, or you know, something to do with the breath. These ideas are there. They've been there for millennia, and we have a choice as to how we. We have the choice to explore, find out more about the body than any one system gives us. That was a long ramble. I'm sorry.
I have a question which is in relation to this one. How's the weather today? Because I have a question about in relation to those Oman. How the weather today? The fact that it's cold and there is a tiny layer of snow would affect the way to contact. What is the impact on the body? The way.
I will not be doing contact outside today. I have a studio here which I can warm up. So how it will affect me is that I will spend some money on fuel, and take advantage of the walls and the roof, as you are doing in Paris there, to keep the weather out and to be able to, dance in a comfortable temperature.
Il y a 10 ans, ouais, il y a 10 ans, je t'avais vu dans une conférence et tu avais parlé de survie à propos du contact improvisation.
10 years ago, I saw you during a lecture and you were talking about survival in contact improvisation.
Et je n'avais pas osé poser la question.
I didn't dare ask the question.
Et pendant 10 ans, je me pose encore la question.
So now I'm still wondering. It's been 10 years and I'm still wondering, why were you talking about survival?
Why?
Why?
Maybe I was hopeful. I was probably talking about making contact improvisation, the creation of it in the early 70s. There was nothing like it available to the public. Obviously in circuses or in gymnastics, the things we do in contact had been done, but it had not been proposed as a safe and reasonable thing for ordinary people to do. So I was at that time very concerned that we weren't going in a direction of danger, just because things sometimes get very extreme in the contact movement. I mean, I don't know how many of you lift other people onto your shoulders, or onto your back. But this is something that is generally considered, by the establishment, unusual activity. So I really had to explore, was this process safe? And now it's so much later, and it seems like it's really quite all right if you're in reasonable health, and if you stay within the limits that you are comfortable with, that your body does learn to accommodate another person's weight, and that especially with support in the torso and support and the proper movement by the person being lifted, if they want to be lifted, if they are actively engaged in getting, onto your body, and you're not just doing it by yourself from will, that it's a very safe procedure, that the whole proposal is safe. There are things that you should know, things like keeping your knees over your toes, that are easy to know. There are things that you should know about your sensations, if your back doesn't feel right, if you're extremely tired or have not had rest, maybe you should take it easy, and not go so far. But in general, it seems that, I don't know, tens of thousands of people have tried this and been all right. But survival remains, for me, a very serious issue, because, for instance, I don't know you. Now, any of you from taking this class might go and try to teach somebody else how to do contact. It isn't very hard to teach. It isn't The ideas are not so difficult. In fact, I think it's built into every human being's nervous system in a way, because we start life. We start in fact inside our mothers, moving around inside somebody else's movement. Then we're born and we're held, and in that holding of the baby, there's all this physical contact and immediacy, a very small, very fast dance going on all the time physically between the mother and the child. So, yeah, it's natural to us. I think that's one reason that it's fairly safe. But at the same time, we have egos, and we have ambitions, and we have I don't know, psychological positions that might make us forceful in the dance, as opposed to compliant and following, as I propose. And that forcefulness in the dance can lead to problems. So this is always a possibility, and so I remain concerned.
I'm coming back to what you said about martial arts and energy and things like this. How would you define the ultimate way of practicing contact? I mean, if you compare it with martial arts, and you've got to become aware of your body and your energy and everything. But then, when you reach a certain point, you've got to stop thinking, actually. And you've got to enter a kind of active meditation state. Would you say the same thing about contact, or?
I mean, that's one process. We start off improvising, by and large. Maybe not a very physical, high energy improvisation, but we start off with touch very often, with head to head, with other examples. So there is built into the process, first of all, your own caution, and I hope that you explore that caution. This leads you from your normal mental activity into really being mind and body operating in the same time and space. From there, you can essentially do contact almost immediately. Whether you get into a sort of meditational space, I think it is often said that in contact you're supposed to stay in the moment. That is, not anticipate what you're going to be doing with or to the other person next, but really try to stay in the moment. I think that's the perhaps the meditation that you're talking about. And in fact, the mind is kind of a time-traveling machine. That you can think about the future, you can think about the past, and in that way, the body cannot do this. The body remains in the time of that's passing for it, and it might be affected by those thoughts. I don't know. Your thought of something horrible that's about to happen might cause your body to tense up. The body might anticipate with the mind some problem. But if your mind is staying in the present, not an easy thing to do. In fact, a sort of complex meditation when you actually try to do it. In that, and if you are in a state of following the dance, it should be similar to the martial arts presentation. I think the martial arts spend much more time training you in specific movements but that doesn't seem to apply if what we want is to liberate your own ability to create movement. If we want to see the whole spectrum of your reflexes and the whole spectrum of your awareness as the development into... This is not a martial art, in other words. It's the opposite of a martial art. In a martial art, you're meant to defend yourself either aggressively or passively. I mean, for instance, Tai Chi, if you do push hands with somebody in Tai Chi, they're hiding their center axis from you by the way they move. You can't push against them and push them over because you can't reach that center of mass because they know how to turn away from you at each moment. In Aikido, the same thing. You're hiding the center of mass. You're not allowing the attack to affect you fundamentally. You're deflecting it with your arms and with your movement, especially with turning and finally guiding the attacker circularly so that they are taken forward off their balance. Forward, which they mean to hit you, say. So that attack means that their mass is going to push into your center. If that center disappears for them, then their mass is...
Hello.
Hey, Simon.
How's it
Guest
going?
just came by. I'm on Skype, so I'm going to keep talking.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Anyway, if the center disappears, then the attacker just keeps falling forward. They have put their own center of mass forward and to make the strike. In contact, when somebody puts their center of mass towards you, you accept it. You give your own center back so that you lean together. And in this way, it's the opposite of a martial art. Nonetheless, strengthening, learning movements, stretching, developing your body is a big part of what will enable you to continue practice and to learn more about how your body operates. So I do propose exercises when I teach contact. Another question?
To pick up on the martial art topic, in the very old article about Aikido, you were saying that it's about shifting from the ego-centered way of relating to the world to a us-centered way of relating to the world.
To a what?
Us.
We-centered. To
We,
a
us.
way of relating to the world through the
We,
others,
us.
through the we. And I don't know, could you go further on that idea?
Is that how is that even? I don't understand why it's a question. I think I'm not sure I could say it more clearly than that. I mean, obviously, anything involving conflict involves someone to have a conflict with, or something. Anyway, in contact improvisation, you have a dance which can only occur because two people decide to have it. One person can't decide. It requires two people to invent this dance. It's my thought at the time was that it's a game that it requires two people to win. So there isn't a loser. There's only whatever happens to the connection between the two people. In that connection, if both people are following, and each is following the other, which is a kind of weird concept, but is easy to demonstrate. You know, just we have innate movement, and we can follow for instance, a small dance. You can try to follow somebody else's small dance while they try to follow yours. Neither one of you is producing this movement consciously. So the conscious part is the desire to follow. That's what produces the connection between the two reflexive dances. So in that state, you're both dependent on the relationship. This is something I referred to early on as, a third element arises. When both people are dependent on the relationship, then the dance occurs. Then that is, contact has occurred. And that's why we called it contact. And why we are interested in improvisation, because once that occurs, once the contact has occurred, the conversation occurs in movement. And the movement can go anywhere you want to invent. Just like a real conversation. We could suddenly start talking about gravity in space. We could suddenly start talking about dancing underwater. We could suddenly, the conversation can move in many directions. But first there has to be what happens between you and me. Or each other. My friend Lisa has a lovely question, which is when you do touch yourself, when you touch yourself, where does your mind focus? What is touching what? And is it possible to actually consider that they're both touching each other? Do you feel both equally, or do you feel hand to forehead and then forehead to hand and hand to forehead and forehead to hand? What is the thought? And why does that thought operate in the way it does? And I think it's a little bit the same in contact. When your weights have connected so that you have become one moving mass, when you have a mutual dependency and mutual following, it's a kind of puts the brain in a kind of questioning state as to who's in control or what's in control or what's happening. Yeah, what's happening? Always a good question. What is happening? And so every action that you take, every reflex that you have, every support, if you make a decision, for instance, to lean on somebody more, like I'm going to relax into this, these are, states of decision, but they're based on something. They're based on the what's appropriate in the position that you find yourself. And it's about that appropriateness. It's about that how to make it appropriate, perhaps. How to get into a state where it becomes appropriate. In other words, active, attentive, responsive. All the things that happen in a handshake. When you shake somebody's hand, you are making an extension of energy into space. And just before the hands meet, you're ready to receive the grip of the other person. So you're both extending your energy and your feelings and your intention, but in a way which is receptive to the same thing coming from the other person. It's a real meeting in that way. It's very common, so we don't really think about it much, but I think it's a real example of key, for instance, that just in that moment before the grip, you are extending in a way that is also receiving. Did I get off the topic?
I think it was direct answer.
There's one question in French. I'm going to translate it.
Il y a de plus en plus de gens dans le monde qui dansent le contact.
There are more and more contactors in the world.
Et les personnes dont la visée n'est pas forcément, n'est pas de se produire sur scène.
people who don't necessarily want to perform contact?
Et pourquoi, à votre avis, qu'est-ce que ça nourrit, qu'est-ce que ça touche dans l'humain, le contact?
So what does contact bring to human beings for them to study, not as a mean to perform, but as a way to nourish themselves?
I mentioned before that when we're born, we have this physical dance going on with our parents. So, in the way that our society has decided is the best way, and maybe partly just because of the nature of children, by the time you're 4 or 5 or 6 years old, a separation starts to occur, and that physical communication stops happening so frequently or so easily, becomes special. Then as you get older and older, it happens less and less. Not perhaps to be found again until we find a romantic interest, where we can again feel that intimate physical connection, romantically, and in love and sex and friendship and other forms where touching is mutual and desired. I think in contact we can explore that legacy that we're born with and that society has decided needs to be stopped at a certain point, and we're more and more isolated in the world, sometimes perhaps never to find it again. It could happen. But we can explore what physical connection with another human being is, and as adults, and with our adult brains and minds, we can. So I think this is what it brought to me anyway. And not only as a movement researcher, it gave me a whole new range of movement and ideas to explore, but it gave me a chance to connect with people in this very fundamental, this basic way. I didn't necessarily know them for more than the dance, but the dance was something. The dance was sometimes, on a train, maybe in a crowd, something will happen. You'll have a moment of intimacy, a remark or a glance or a smile with a stranger. Something funny happens and your eye finds somebody else appreciating that moment, and you'll have this moment that is rich with connection. I think those are quite marvelous moments, and I think I've had thousands of them with people I've danced with. Real, relaxed, strong eye contact, smiles, laughs sometimes, a sense of warm connection. And I hope that studying contact brings that to you. It's not at all on that level about becoming what you would call an expert contactor. I mean, expert, what does that mean in this? I'm not interested in the virtuosity. I'm interested in what the physical activity, that we've tried to describe can bring overall amongst people. What kind of team are you as a group, What bonds, what feelings, what communication can you have that you couldn't have before?
Okay, thank you, Steve. Thank you, everyone. Merci tout le monde. Thank you, Steve.